Hey everyone, this is the second episode of Dylan Rants. You ask me questions and I rant on them. Although I should also add, I want to include not just questions that are asked by my viewership, friends, acquaintances, what have you, but also things that I want to rant on. I am Dylan T. McKinnon. I'm an outdoor educator. I've worn a lot of hats over the years. I've been involved in not for profits, conservation groups. I've done a little bit of, copper and silversmithing jewelry work. I've worked as an arborist and an organic, pesticides applicator. I've done a little bit of everything. I've been a line cook. I've been around the block, and I'm just here to share with y'all my experiences and opinions on the world. So, jumping right in, I just got off a phone call with a good friend of mine, Maya, and I asked as soon we got a long phone call talking about ancestry and skills and just how we connect with and reconcile with who we are as people with and where we come from. But there, Maya's their question was. I'm so happy. Thank you, Maya, so much for asking this question, not jumping right into what I've already been talking about. Tender masculinity and survival skills. Maya asked, Dylan, what is your favorite cover crop? I love this question. Thank you so much. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with what a cover crop is it's a plant that you have planted or sown, if you will, into a field in between the crop that's actually producing the main food for humans, fodder if it's for food for animals. The term fodder is it's animal food. So there are a bunch of different species that have been used for that, and they tend to get short shrift. They tend to not get as much shine, as it were, in the larger, let's call it homesteading world. They're not given as much credit because we're so focused on, I'm putting the effort into growing this plant, planting the plant. I want to feed me, or I want to feed my livestock, and there's a lot less consideration for the real purpose of a cover crop, which is protecting the soil, feeding the soil, making sure that the actual earth that the plants are growing out of is cared for. So it's whether it's making sure that the soil has the fodder plant has enough roots that dig down deep enough in the soil to help loosen up the soil, so you don't have to put in all the effort and the more aggressive action of tilling the soil, which you don't always have to do. Tilling or plowing, turning the soil over tends to get it can often be overused as a technique. It's essential for certain crops, certain soils, certain conditions, but it's a little overused. So some plants will help loosen the soil, deep-rooted plants. So there are, cover crop radishes. Daikon radish in particular is known for having a really deep rootstock that helps loosen up the soil. And there are other plants that are known for giving back to the soil. We call it amending the soil. So those are often nitrogen fixers. So plants that have the adaptations whereby they can actually draw nitrogen not out of something that's fertilizing the soil, whether it's modern agriculture, whether it's a chemical fertilizer like ammonium nitrate, or if it's back in the day, whether it's manure. If we were applying uric acid or urea or ammonia to the soil. There are plants that are adapted. Most of them are legumes in the pea and bean family that are adapted to pull the nitrogen out of the air itself. It's an amazingly magical process that they're able to do this, because they have, and I could do a whole other video on the subject of nitrogen fixing plants, but Nitrogen fixers are very commonly known to be among the more used or more necessary cover crops. So that's my introduction. Maya, my favorite cover crop. It's basic of me, I know, but white clover. I absolutely love white clover as a cover crop, or as an old world nitrogen fixing plant, because clovers are in the legume family. Clovers they're related to beans, they're related to peas, they're related to, there's a bunch of legumes that are trees, locust trees, black locust, honey locust. Those are legumes. They all fix nitrogen. White clover, it's a lovely little plant. It's a perennial, so it'll keep on coming back year after year after year. I also love red clover. That's a biennial. So you plant it one year, it grows that year, stores up all its energy in its roots, and the next year it'll produce its beautiful red, its red clover flowers, and then it'll die back. It'll drop its seeds, but it'll seed itself. But something about white clover. Like I said, I know it's basic of me, but it's I love clover lawns. I love the little flowers. It's very pleasant to lay on. It's very pleasant to walk on, and that really is my favorite cover crop for more intensive agriculture. For plant species that, as far as like cover crops, like a thing that you're planting and making sure it's the one that's there. I only have so much experience. I have relatively limited experience with tilling fields, turning over the soil to bury the sod, the roots and the plants the previous year onto the soil and then planting stuff. I don't have much experience with that, so I can't speak as much to that. The other ones I think of that I have experience with are other members of the legume family. So vetch, it's another legume. Alfalfa, another legume. Go figure. Vetch, crown vetch, alfalfa. Those are all lovely plants. They're lovely. They're useful. They grow a bit taller and a bit. I don't like using the word, but weedier, I guess you could say. So it's a lankier plant. It doesn't quite sit. It's not as I don't know, not as cultivated. It's not as much of a plant that you see it in the field, but you don't expect to see it in your in your kitchen door garden as much. But white clover, it grows everywhere. So that's definitely my favorite plant that I would consider a conventional cover crop. So I'll stick a pin in that there, because I can go on more and more about my opinions on. So most of my field maintenance is with mowing. All the fields I tend to, my fields, I mow with a brush hog, a brush mower. So I'm not I'm not mowing it like a lawn. You couldn't play soccer on it on my fields, but I'm trying to encourage the regrowth of the grasses, and more importantly the native sedges and the woody forbs and some of the native shrubs. So my fields, I'm taking care of native hazel bushes, Corylus. I forget the North American. There's a couple species of North American Corylus, North American hazelnuts, also called filberts. They call them filberts in the old world. I don't know. It's a wimpy name, filbert. Who the hell names someone named filbert? So I don't like calling them filberts, but people in the nut industry refer to them as filberts for, I don't know, whatever reason. Stop calling them filberts. It's a stupid, boring name. um, I'm tending to the native hazelnuts. I'm tending to the sweet fern, one of my favorite sort of old field or fallow field plants, Comptonia peregrina, or peregrina. I absolutely one of my personal like medicine plants. It means a great deal to me. And so I live on a little hilltop that's called, and my family has always referred to it as sweet fern knoll. And since I was a little kid, that was the first medicinal plant I was introduced to. Is this? It's not quite a shrub. It only grows maybe a, a 3 foot tall plant will be huge, and a 4 foot tall plant will be like a giant. Why haven't you trimmed it back yet? They don't grow very big, but they're very well adapted to very poor quality soils. And I guess tying this into the cover crop question, is they're a nitrogen fixer. So they're actually, I'm gonna rant on sweet fern just a little bit. Um, it was not only the first plant I was introduced to as a medicinal, which is very, very important to me. Sweet fern tea was the first wild tea that I ever interacted with. You take the fresh leaves or dried fresh leaves and steep them in hot water, and it's a very, I'm trying to find the, let's see, it is a bitter, sweet spectrum plant, almost like things like basil or oregano or rosemary, but not quite as bitter as them. Almost more towards the chamomile end of the bitter and sweet flavors. Like I said in my last video, I'm sure I need to ask my sister, who is a professional at this, who works in herbalism. And so I'm sure one of these sessions, get a few sessions in, I'll ask her, and she'll be able to say, "Oh, that's this, and this." I'm sure she has better words for what I'm trying to describe, but it's very, I wouldn't say bittersweet. It's a sweet and bitter tea, very common for the stomach. If you have an upset stomach, upset digestion, there are tannins in it, tannic acids, so it can help balance out your acid interactions in your digestion. If you simmer the leaves you take the leaves and actually put them in water it's more boiling, you draw out much more of the tannins from the leaves, and it makes an excellent skin wash. I not so much now, but when I was younger, I had bad acne. I had serious acne issues, and sweet fern is an excellent acne wash for helping, I guess, dry out oily skin. As you can see from the shine on my head, I've got an oily complexion. It's what I have. So my skin doesn't dry in the wind, but my issues are mostly from having an oily complexion. So that was helpful for me. I haven't used this personally, but I've heard that it makes a good eye wash. Like if you have conjunctivitis of some kind, or if you get grit in your eye. I haven't used this myself. Don't take my word on it. Research it. Like with everything I say, I'm very bombastic. I got some feedback. I'm trying not to curse as much. I talk a lot of manure in my in my spoken verse, what have you. So, nope, I'm gonna curse. I talk a lot of shit. There we go. I talk a lot of shit, and I want you to, as my viewership, to don't believe everything I say, and whatever I'm offering here is just my idle opinion. I don't have a PhD in anything. I don't have a high school degree. I'm just some guy. I'm just some bum that by any academic standards, nothing I say should matter at all, because no one has signed a piece of paper that says I know anything. So please, for anything I'm saying, do your research. Do what I did. And when I heard something, I would research it and look for another source. So with any edible plant stuff or wild medicinal plants, don't just take Peterson's guide to it. Look at the Audubon guide. Don't take the Audubon guide. Look at another guide, another. Get at least 3 sources of anything that you're researching, especially with something like medicinals or edibles. Don't never take just some mohawk bearded guy's word for it off the interwebs. Dig deep. And I would highly recommend, especially because I'm communicating via YouTube, via the internet, go to a physical library. This is a horribly boring thing for me to say. When someone writes something down on a book that gets published on paper made from ground up trees, um, it's harder to bullshit there. You get called to account a lot more than you do just on the interwebs. So please, yeah, please don't take what to summarize. Don't take everything I say as gospel. Nothing I say is gospel. I'm just a guy. Um, to finish off on sweet fern, I recently, in the last 5 years or so, I learned so this is a my first plant growing up. It's the hill I grew up on. It's the first medicinal plant I interact with. It means a great deal to me. I got this wonderful book on paleontology, and particularly included each chapter wasn't just talking about which dinosaurs are around at this point or how big were mammoths back then, but it included it's a gorgeous illustrated book. I'm not going to list it here because I forget the exact name and whatever. Figure it out for yourself. Um, it was also talking about the paleobotany, the extinct plants that were found in each layer, and I learned it's one of the most. I shouted out loud when I saw it, and when my father was still alive, I ran immediately and said, "Dad, Donk, you can't believe won't believe this. Sweet fern, Comptonia, this little shrub, the leaves were around in the Eocene." And for those of you who aren't geology nerds, um, they were around not just in eastern North America, not just in West North America, but over the entire northern hemisphere. They were around back when horses were the size of rabbits. Horses were the size of jackrabbits, and these leaves, look it up, please. Look it up. This plant needs more credit, needs more shine. If there's nothing else I do in this life, give this plant more shine. Their leaves show up in the fossil record. They're very distinct fern-like leaves, but the lobes of the leaves are sort of awkwardly offset, about like this. So if you think like a massive fern frond, each like little lobe of on each little, not the frond itself, but each leaflet. If you're colloquially, each little sub thing you could break off the long frond, each leaflet. So this isn't a fern; it's a flowering plant, but each leaflet has these little lobes on it that are very distinctly. It's not set like this, or set offset like that. It's kind of awkwardly half reset. This is the stem. There's sort of awkwardly half or 3/4 reset set off of it, and it's a very very distinct veining pattern. And they were around over the whole northern hemisphere shortly after dinosaurs went extinct. I'm going to go so far to say that, yeah, in my arrogant opinion, and more importantly, in my headcanon, in my fantasy of what I think was, I could be wrong. This is just my fantasy. It inspires me. Maybe it'll inspire you. I like to think that sweet fern was around at the end of the Cretaceous, before the dinosaur went extinct, before the Chicxulub impactor, the comet or asteroid that hit the Yucatan Peninsula and wiped out everything that weighed more than 50 kilos in the world. I like to think this plant was around, or if not this plant, its ancestors probably smelled similar to it, were around. And I like to imagine that tyrannosaurs would have stepped on a plant like this or interacted with a plant like this. So who knows? Maybe someone will do a bit more. Maybe some paleobotanist who has actually paid the money to get a degree on this can actually tell me, oh, Dylan, no, we know for certain they only came about later after the Eocene because whatever, the ceratopsian dinosaurs were too aggressive herbivores of them, or we can see that our predecessors, the plants before Comptonia, before the ancestral sweet ferns, that evolved immediately after the Eocene. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there, but it fits in a very special place in my heart because of that, because of those elements. The house I grew up in, the hilltop I grew up on, the fields I take care of even today, and also my time in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey. Sweet fern is one of the most important medicinal plants in the Pine Barrens of South New Jersey, which is very sacred to the Lenni Lenape people. Lenni Lenape, Lenni Lenape, I believe is how the correct pronunciation. Lenni, not Lenny. I again, I apologize for not knowing more. It's a very important medicinal and really cool to further tie into this, to further rant on this plant. There is a parasitic fungus, a rust fungus. Now, rust funguses, for those of you who are for those of you, all of you out there who are so familiar with the fungal pests of deciduous plants in the northern United States, rust fungi tend to be species of funguses that are parasitic on woody plants, and they'll often go from one woody plant species, often a shrub, to another, often a conifer. So a good example is cedar apple rust. So the eastern red cedar, it's actually a juniper, Juniperus virginianus. It has a fungus that doesn't kill them, but it spreads, it's a problem to the apple trees. So the cedar trees will have this rust fungus that'll be dormant on the plant. You'll actually see these weird little, it's almost like a, not quite a ping pong ball size, a little sphere on the branches of the cedar. That's the fruiting body waiting to wake up. When a big rain comes on the eastern red cedars, there'll be this little like orangish tentacly ball thing. Almost looks like a cheerleader's pom-poms. Or if you're familiar with Pokemon, it looks like a, oh my goodness, what the heck is the name of that Pokemon? Ah, shoot. Anyways, looks like a little pile of little tentacly things. It's bright orange colored. It's almost like the color of like a clementine orange. And that's the fruiting body. It releases spores that infects apple trees. That's cedar apple rust. There's a rust that's lethal to white pines, and it's white pine currant rust. I believe it's currants that spreads. It's lethal to the white pine tree, not lethal to the deciduous currant bush. And the sweet fern is part of the dual, tooth life cycles of the pitch pine, which is the dominant pine tree in the Pine Barrens, and the sweet fern. So you only see this rust when both those plants are living in the same space. So that's just another cool thing about that plant. So that's my rant on sweet fern and on cover crops. So again, Maya, thank you so much for asking that question and starting the ball rolling on my rant on that. I think the next question I should address is, in my previous video, my first Dylan rants, the technical difficulties, my recording device here had run out of space, and I wasn't able, I wound us all up. I said, oh, I so love talking about moving through brush or moving through broken terrain. How do you move through thick brush being unseen? This was a question from my cousin Brian. And I wound that up, and I didn't actually answer the question. So here is now my rant on moving through brush, moving over broken terrain, moving through thorns. How is it that how is it that a person could move through, digestive issues. How is it that I can walk through natural substrates, bushes, shrubs, whatever, without getting snagged, first of all, or getting cut up by, I'm going to talk about thorny plants, because that's where I really have the greatest connection. I think that's where the real challenge is for moving through brush. So maybe before I go into thorny plants, I'll start with moving through the underbrush, the thickets, if you will, of northeastern United States. We have a lot of different shrub species, and unless there's a very serious, heavy, shading canopy, there's going to be a lot of plants close to the ground. Even if when there is heavy shade, I live in Connecticut. Our state flower is the mountain laurel, and that will form very dense thickets, very close to the ground. So how is it that we move through it without creating a big disturbance? So let's whatever you're walking through the woods, off trail, and whether it's you don't want to injure the plants, you don't want to injure the shrubs, the various mountain laurels, or different species of azaleas, or different species of viburnums. We have like a dozen species of viburnums that live in on the forest floor. We have many different plants. You don't want to injure them. A human body, if you're just stumbling through, especially if you're wearing heavy footwear, which I don't recommend for various reasons. I'll do a whole other video on that. It can be easy through lack of experience or through ignorance to snap a branch or injure a plant one way or another. I would say should be the primary consideration. So I'm going to take a little while to answer this. It's at least a 4 or 5 point answer to the question. Actually, no, I'll start it from there. First and foremost, your consideration for how not to create a disturbance in the landscape. Let's say at the end result, you want to be an elf, you want to be a sneaky wood ninja, and you want to be able to wander through the woods unseen like a panther or something, because it feels really, really cool to be invisible in the woods. Don't get me wrong, it's an amazing experience knowing that you can move through, you can flow through the brush, like a shadow in the night. It's a beautiful experience. It's a deeply moving, and I would even say a deeply spiritual experience when you can sit on a hilltop, and I'm gonna say this, but I'm not diminishing this. You can sit in a meadow, cross-legged, and through meditation, through peaceful introspection, feel all the living things around you, and be, connected to the bumblebees feeding on the white clover at your feet, or connected to the red-winged blackbirds in the swamp next to you. And that is valid, and that is a completely valid and reasonable way to connect to creation. I'll just put it that way. It's a different thing. It's more dynamic, more active, more alive when your meditation is a moving meditation, and it's more dynamic when you are more alive, more vital, when there's not, the purpose isn't just to, I'm at one with everything around me, but when the purpose is, I need to move through you, my brothers and sisters, my fellow plants, my fellow living things, in a way that doesn't disturb you, hurt you, or disturb the bumblebee, or disturb the red-winged blackbird. It's easier to be peaceful when you're not doing anything. This is a good advice for life. It's easy to be peaceful and to cause no harm when you're not moving. When there's like hey, people, anything can move around you, even if you're offensive, even if you're bothersome. The living world can move around you. The breeze, the plants, the bees, everything, they can move around you. When you're moving, you create a lot more disruption. So it takes a lot more effort to move over the landscape without creating disturbance. So I would say for me, if there was one thing I could say, in case my video gets cut out right now, if there were one simple point to how to move through the brush without creating disturbance or hurting yourself or hurting the plants, is just start by asking the landscape, asking the plants, interact with the plants, with whatever brush, whether it's a if we're in the south, if we were in Ocean County in New Jersey and we're moving to the brush, connect with the plant. Look at the plant. Look at it and engage. Make so they don't have eyes, but make contact with your eyes and say, "Hey, I don't want to hurt you. How can I flow past you? How can we dance together? You know, how can we move so that that there's the least amount of harm?" That will be the first step. And if there were only one thing that you did, that step, that question could guide you to the end result, which is being able to, can you crawl? Like I think for me the end result is, can you crawl naked through greenbriers? Can you crawl naked through a greenbrier patch with minimal scrapes? I've never done that with 0 scrapes. You always get some scrapes because it's greenbrier. But that will be the end result. And that end result comes from, that glorious, idealized, I am one with the natural world, I'm an elf. It starts from caring about the little plants and their well-being more than you care about how cool do I look? How fancy do I look while I'm doing it? And I say that because I know, because so much of my education work has included movement and stalking movement. The word stalking is very problematic. This is not in any way talking about, when we hear the word stalking, we're talking about, a very problematic human behavior, felonious human behavior of someone who is problematically or dangerously following someone else's actions and their steps and everything else. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about moving. This is from a natural standpoint, moving over the landscape like an animal that is stalking, like a cat, or better yet, like a deer, or any animal that doesn't want to give away its position. Most animals don't want to and can't afford to give away their position. So pretty much every animal out there that's not a bear or an elephant is spending the majority of its time, most of its movement, in a stalking step, in trying not to give away its position. And so you say, wait a minute, a rabbit's not stalking. It's not, creeping up on anything. Like, rabbits are stalking up on clover plants. They're creeping up on whatever it is that they're going to eat. They may not be worried about whether the white clover that they're stalking up on is going to see them, but they're mindful that there's other things out there that want to eat them. So being hidden, being subtle, having the least amount of impact, or giving off the smallest, in my teaching community, we call it concentric rings. When you drop a pebble in a pond, it leaves, there are rings that echo out. Everything that happens in the natural world releases a concentric ring. There's an impact that happens to everything else around it. So it's everything out there. Most living things are trying to leave as little of an impact. They're trying to give away they only want to give away their position as much as they absolutely have to, because everything has a predator. So again, my rant on stalking. Thank you for attending my TED Talk. So that'll be the first step in how to move through the brush, move over the landscape without creating more of a ruckus than you want to. It's just interacting with the plants as though you actually see them as living things, as fellow living things, and you don't want to harm them. That will be the most important thing. The first step to start from. That's where I start from. After that, and Monday. This is I talk about masculinity, tender masculinity. I want to step away from the masculinity, femininity, just talk about tenderness in general. Um, I know many people would go at moving the brush from the one side of, oh, you just you charge through the brush and who cares what notices you and who cares what plants you hurt, because I don't want to show that I care about this witch hazel plant, because if I say that I care about this witch hazel plant, it means I care about things, and that's a vulnerability. That's the less tender, the more hardened, more stoical side of the human experience. But then it's also on the other side. And this is not, so I'm not saying one's better than the other, but on the other side, it's like, oh, I'm so concerned. I don't want to hurt this little plant. This little thing, this helpless little thing, I don't want to cause harm. Why would I even walk through the brush when every step I take, I'm crushing seedlings? That's another extreme. On the other side, that's just as, if you're trying to interact with the natural world, that's just as far an extreme over here as the other, more aggressive, I don't care. I care so much, I can't do anything. I care so little, I'm mostly causing harm. You do have to if you're trying to move through the woods like an elf, you do have to actually take some time to stumble in the woods. My advice that I gave this to a friend years ago who was wanting advice on learning how do you, saying, Dylan, how do I start? I've reached a block on my flow, my brush flow, my movement. How do I take the next step? What I advised to them was they were working in the pine barrens of New Jersey, where there's a lot of scrub oak, which is a small oak plant that's maybe 5 feet tall. They're small plants. That maybe the stalks are maybe thumb thick, and it's very thick, dense undergrowth. I said there's so many small trails that deer make small trails, and rabbits make small trails. It's very easy if you're very attentive and listening to. I say listening. If you're feeling, intuiting what the plants are showing you, here's the easy way to move past us. It's very easy to keep falling onto a path or an easier spot. Like, well, yeah, but I want to know how to move to the harder spots. What I recommended was pick a spot, like a spot on a tree, maybe say 50 yards away from you, and head straight towards that spot. And you'll have to move around this plant or that plant, but just pick that spot and head towards that. And so that's sort of your goal, is that one. That's the direction we're heading. And your body, you do this enough times, your body starts to learn. That's the only way I can describe it, really. It's like learning how to it'd be like learning how to swim, or learning how to here's the best way the best physical metaphor I can use to describe what it feels like for me when I am moving through small plants around my height that let's call it brush or thickets or whatever. The way I relate to it, let's call it the flow, the way I flow through it, it feels similar. My body, my heart, my spirit feels similar to the way I feel when I'm standing in. I'm on a beach. I'm standing in water about to, let's say, about here, right? And you're standing there, and the waves are coming in, and there's that sort of weightless, that flow, where it's not just feeling the water lift you up and lower you down. You can feel there's a pull as the wave comes in, and a push as it goes out. It sort of drags you along. That's the way it feels for me. That's the kinesthetic sensation I get when I'm really in the headspace where I am moving with the plants, moving with the plant people in such a way that I'm causing the least amount of harm.